Sakiemi, I'd like to ask you, what are your key research areas in the field of natural resource governance, and what would you consider some of the key priorities of resource governance in Africa?
I'm researching basically in corruption, and when it comes to natural resources, I also happen to come from a resource area. There is a lot of opacity. There is no openness in the management of resources. We have a situation where those in political authority generally come from outside the producing areas, so they do not have any direct feel of what it is like to come from a producing area. What they see in the newspapers oftentimes is exaggerated to them, so they don't have a feel. So that is why we say that a more appropriate engagement with the community, whereby they will be involved in deciding on processes, they will be heard, and then people can now properly engage with them, would be of help.
The field of natural resource governance theory has continued to evolve. What are some of the challenges that researchers in this area should be engaging with?
I think one of the major challenges is to move away from African exceptionalism, looking at Africa as, first of all, as if it's a continent whereupon we have to really start afresh and look at theory development afresh. But first of all, learn from theory and work that's happened elsewhere. But therein also look at local specificities and kind of then begin to look at what are the nuances in the present context, and how does theory that's already been developed apply to present situations. And I think also one other thing that needs to do is for that kind of activity to happen more with the input of the African basically what I would call African scholars, people who are steeped in the history of the place, people who understand the different dynamics, be they the structural issues, or people who would understand dynamics at a community level better. But yeah, I think it would help if we can sort of like marry theory that's been developed and that's now mature with experiences from the ground with African scholars who are invested in theory development.
How can theoretical perspectives bring us closer to an understanding of the dynamics on the continent in the field of natural resource governance?
It seems very much that the challenge is twofold. One is to do with the resource curse theory dimension, the other is to do with resource governance theory, because the governance mechanisms aren't likely to work unless we really understand how resources, and particularly specific types of resources, impact development outcomes. And so some of the key governance challenges then become, in part, about asking the right questions about the impact of resources. So if diamonds have a very specific impact, then we need governance mechanisms that are actually finely tuned to understanding the particular dynamics of diamond wealth. Likewise with oil. We need different initiatives for different types of resources. That's probably what the literature is showing us. And then we have some more nitty-gritty challenges of how exactly do you work out how to set up a stabilization fund that isn't subject to rent seeking and all the rest of it. How do you set up a sovereign wealth fund that actually does contribute to the diversification of your economic structure? Now, I think that remains a massive challenge, is that despite booming growth, especially in African mineral wealthy countries at the moment, we're finding that the necessary incentives to diversify into something more innovative, whether it's industry or services, still isn't there yet. And so that's still a key question. How do we diversify away from over-reliance on a single resource?
What are the most urgent needs in order to secure improved governance of Africa's resources?
From my perspective, I think that really the challenge with resource governance is also institutional structures that are transparent, structures that are well equipped with human resources that are capable to actually manage and oversee the oil resources that states do have. And I think that is one of the challenges for a country like Ghana specifically. It's a growing oil economy. And so these structures really needs to be built. At this point in time, the structures are still weak and they have to be strengthened so that they can actually enforce those policies like the Petroleum Revenue Management Act and the Petroleum Commission Act so that they can work. Because we realize that in accordance with the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, they're supposed to have a public interest and accountability committee. And this committee is supposed to have civil society organizations in it. But up until this time, their structures are not well laid out. Their mandate is still unclear. And this actually hinders their participation and their effectiveness in managing and overseeing the oil resource. So that is one of the challenges I see. And I keep on saying capacity building, capacity building, capacity building. Capacity building for civil society organizations, capacity building for state organizations, and capacity building even for the community members so that they will understand what is needed in managing the oil revenues and also be able to interact with the state, with other partners on issues that are affecting them, and also be sort of watchdogs, to watch and monitor that foreign investors don't just do whatever they want when they come to the communities. The state doesn't just siphon what the community has to benefit from and ensure that every benefit trickles down to the people, and that is why capacity building is important, and that is still lacking in the system. So for me, mainly these two key challenges are very, very deepening and entrenching, and they have to be looked into and find measures to resolve those challenges.
So often the focus tends to be on mining oil and gas. Can you please tell us a bit more about some of your research?
So one very important resource in South Africa and in other parts of Africa, very important for proper governance, is fisheries. South Africa has over 3,000 kilometers of coastal of coastline, and millions of inhabitants live there, many of which are dependent upon the marine resources for their livelihoods. So looking at broader challenges, it is very important that these fisheries be monitored effectively. And not only that, there needs to be strategies that are looking at the local context. There's not going to be one strategy for all of South Africa or all of Africa, but each community will have different needs, and governing the resources in those communities will vary upon the different contexts.